Hi, my name is Stacy Mitchum, and we're going to talk about establishing an effective orientation program for the new nurses. So it's important that we have a well-established orientation program for the new nurses. An article that I found stated that nurses who received an orientation program had a better transition into their work environments than those who did not participate in the program at all. We want to make sure that this orientation program contains all important tasks that are needed for these new nurses' role into the organization. It provides also a continuity of training. It creates a foundation for nurses to build on their skills, to enhance them, so that way they become more proficient in them. It also builds critical thinking skills, and it fosters teamwork and collaboration amongst the staff. Lack of an effective program can lead to medical errors causing patient harm because the new nurses aren't getting the hands-on training during their orientation phase. And then it also can lead to nurse burnout, where nurses feel like they haven't learned the necessary skills to care for patients in a safe environment, a safe manner. So they spend a lot of time running around and can get pretty tired and stressed out. And then they don't feel like they're part of the team because they're not getting any help. So it will cause them to want to leave the job to seek work elsewhere. So it's important that we set our new nurses up for success to be able to provide quality patient care within a safe environment. So overview of the current issue. Right now, the orientation program, the nurses are stating that they're having a lack of enhanced job knowledge and their critical thinking skills aren't up to par. So a study that was conducted in a bone marrow transplant center revealed that a lack of an effective orientation program led to knowledge deficits, lack of certain skill sets, and additional learning needs. So we want to make sure that we set these nurses up for success. They're also having issues with decreased morale and teamwork on the floor. They feel like they can't ask each other questions because they feel like they're going to be scrutinized or made fun of. They also use multiple preceptors during their orientation program, so they don't get that continuity. There's also an absence of nurse manager oversight. They're not following up with the new nurse or preceptor to make sure that they're getting everything they need to in order to provide patient care. And the length of the program isn't consistent across the board. So some nurses are completing it within 6 weeks, some within 4 weeks. So many orientation programs are high-paced in an attempt to hurry the new nurse up and learning their job, so that way they may be independent. But that's not safe. You have new nurses that are coming out on the floor before they're ready to come out their orientation program, trying to take on a full patient load. And they're also unfamiliar on how to use equipment assigned to the unit. To learn it at that time when it's needed is not the time to try to figure out how to use that machine. So we need to include that into our orientation program. And they're having difficulty locating the organization and unit policies in their checklist. So we need to make sure that we consolidate it to make it easier for them to find, so that way they may review these during their orientation. So the setting, so this orientation program is going to be at a military medical center. It's an inpatient medical surgical unit, 34 patient beds. Their average daily census is about 24 patients, and their throughput is around 38. So those same patients that they start off with at the beginning of shift necessarily aren't going to be those same patients that they'll have at the end of shift. So they can have a complete turnaround. And the shifts are set up with 6 nurses per shift, and that's including their charge nurse. So a little bit of suggested interventions. So a little bit of nurse humor. You have this preceptor that is standing here talking to one of her new nurse that she's orienting, and the new nurse came with a stack of papers. And she states, "You mentioned that new nurses shouldn't be afraid to ask questions, so I have a few, and I hope you have a few hours to spare." So you notice she has all these questions. She is eager, she's excited, she's ready to start the unit. So we want to set them up for success. So we want to make sure that we create an effective orientation program for them. And we also want to make sure that they have a dedicated preceptor. So to have an effective orientation program, the purpose of it is to ensure that new nurses are able to perform their duties proficiently. So we want to make sure we include all those necessary clinical skills, anywhere from setting up wall suction to being able to hang IV fluids. And they also need to be able to get that hands-on training with the equipment, from the EK machine to the IV machines. And they need to be able to locate those organizational and unit policies, know where they're at, review them during the orientation phase. And then also document an electronic medical record, because every unit you go to have different things that are required to document. So you want to make sure that those specifics are included in the orientation program. And then upon completion of each of the tasks that they get done, you want to make sure that preceptor and that nurse are initialing and dating that task, saying they completed it in real time when it got done. And the goal is for the orientation program to be completed within 6 weeks. So the dedicated preceptor, the purpose of having one is to guide new nurses successfully through their unit processes. So you want one dedicated preceptor who is assigned to work, teach, and train that new nurse. They need to include all necessary training skill levels that are needed to become a preceptor. So that preceptor will be chosen by the nurse manager based on their years of experience and their capability to lead, to teach, and they also need to be able to have effective communication skills, so that way they're able to help guide that new nurse through some of the processes, some of the checklist. And they need to foster that teamwork and collaboration, to know that they're not alone, that if they have questions or they're not sure of something or they're a little bit confused, that they feel comfortable with coming to their preceptor and asking for help. And to provide weekly feedback sessions with their preceptor and their new nurse, so that way they know their areas of success and the areas of improvement. So the nurse administrator's role. The American Nursing Association came out with a scope and standards of practice for nursing administration. There are 14 standards that kind of gives the roles and responsibilities of that nurse administrator. And one of them, Standard 6, states that nurse administrators will evaluate, plan, and make the necessary improvements to attain the needed outcomes. So that includes the orientation program. So what also needs to happen for this orientation program, the nurse administrator, they need to be able to meet with that new nurse and preceptor at the beginning of the orientation to establish those expectations of what the program encompasses. They also need to do a midterm feedback session, kind of a check-in, to make sure that, to see how things are going, to make sure that nurse is getting what they expect to get out of that program. And sometimes that means they might have to do a change up of preceptors if things aren't working out. And they also need to meet with the new nurse and preceptor upon completion of all the requirements, so that way they can make sure everything is signed off. And to perform follow-ups with that preceptor on a weekly basis, so that way they can provide that guidance and that real-time help when needed. And to review the orientation checklist and feedback documentation. So the communication plan, we're going to hold a brainstorming committee. This includes all the stakeholders, the flight commander, the nurse manager, clinical nurse specialists, preceptors, and some of the nursing staff. And we want to attain important tasks that are needed that they wish they would have been able to learn during that orientation phase. And also to collect their feedback from what happened during the orientation phase, that you wish that you would have received or that you would have gotten that would have helped you today as being an independent nurse. And then we also want to create the unit policy. So once we are able to come up with an effective orientation program, we want to make sure that we send a policy out to the nurses stating that this is what's going to happen. New nurses are going to have to do the 6-week program to work on their competencies, so that way they be able to perform independent patient care, and also to provide them with a new checklist, so that way they can review it to see what's coming. And then we want to continue to communicate this plan at our monthly staff meetings. We want to make sure that they are up to date on where we are at in the process, because that way we want to keep reminding them that this is still happening. A change in process doesn't happen overnight. It does take some time. So we want to keep them up to date on where we are in that process. And we want to promote and empower that teamwork, and also that academic excellence, that we're trying to help them to be stronger and to be better nurses. And ultimately, we want to prevent unintentional harm to patients. So budgetary needs, the nurse manager is going to have to meet with the resource management office. They're going to sit down, they're going to perform an analysis, they're going to evaluate for any potential or additional funding costs with this new process that we're going to put in place. And if funding is needed, they'll help you provide the justification that will need to be addressed for that additional funding. And they'll help you put all that stuff together, and then have the organizational commander, that person's going to have to review it, because they're the ones that are going to have to give you the final approval for the funding in order to proceed forward. So some of the evaluation methods, we're going to conduct a SWOT analysis. We're going to identify the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats with the current program. We're going to collect that data. We're going to obtain the feedback from all the preceptors, and we're going to use it to address what new strategies we want to implement. We also are going to need to conduct quarterly reviews of the new program. We're going to have to do this for at least 2 years. So that way we can adjust and make those necessary changes to make sure we have, the right amount of task and the right number of weeks to get the stuff completed. And then once we finally reach the 2-year mark to where the program is actually sustainable, we want to conduct yearly reviews so that way we can make those modifications as needed. So for the Christian worldview, as nurse administrators, we have a calling to serve. We serve our patients. We take care of them. We try to nurture them, try to get them back to health, so that way we can get them back home to their loved ones. We also have a calling to serve our staff, to provide them with the support, the resources to be able to provide that care for our patients. And we also need to serve ourselves, to take that time to reflect, to figure out ways to make our areas better. So for servant leadership characteristics, nurse administrators, we need to have that emotional intelligence. We need to be able to identify and manage our own emotions, so that way we know how we are responding. We need to be transparent in our communication. We need to be open and honest with our staff. We need to foster teamwork through respect. In order to receive respect, we must be able to give it and treat our staff with it. And we also need to respect the backgrounds of the staff, because everybody comes from different backgrounds, different experience levels. So we need to make sure that we provide them with the tools and the resources necessary to hone in on their skills to become great nurses to take care of our patients. And then share your faith through your actions. Don't sit behind your desk and think that that's what's going to help drive and push these processes. Your staff needs to know that you're out there helping them, that you're willing to put in the work as well. And then you need to incorporate your values into your everyday work of how you treat your staff. So that way they will also begin to incorporate their own. And be resilient. Teach your staff to be resilient. It's okay to have those bumps in the road, but you must be able to overcome it and be able to get right back to caring for those patients. So in conclusion, the orientation programs, they ensure nurses receive adequate and proper training to ensure safe patient care, because we don't want to cause unintentional harm to our patients. So we need to set our new nurses up for success. Nurse administrators, they need to promote the implementation of needed processes. So they need to go out there and they need to find processes that aren't the best that they can be, and do the research and involve the staff to make those processes better, because this is their work environment. And then preceptors, they should have the commitment to want to teach. They also should have those communication and leadership skills. So you need to make sure that we have the right people in place to train our new nurses when they come in.